is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Grace of Kings, chapters 37, 38, and 39. In these chapters, we get some correspondence between Jia and Kuni, resulting after Kuni sneaks away from his island prison to see Jia again. It's a rocky reunion, and they wind up working through it, and it's actually quite beautiful. But man, it is pretty emotional and very tricky. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This section, man, so those of you, I talked in the last episode when we were with Jia and she had decided that she was going to go and sleep with Otho, about how I had some problems with my marriage and loneliness and dealing with that. And obviously, in my case, it was very different because we weren't separated from each other. It was just that he was away a lot. And there was no way that we were going to come to an arrangement like this. I know that people who are poly get a lot of shit from, everyone because it's an unconventional relationship type. But really, there are times where I envy that because I'm not capable of it. I have too much insecurity and hang up to really be cool with my partner being into somebody else. I would just be constantly comparing myself and worried that I wasn't as cool or as fun or as good in bed or as pretty or whatever. And yet I wish that I had that ability, and I wish that I was able to make something work with my ex in that sense. Not because I really want that, but just because it really does get to this black and white point where you're just I guess since I need something and you're not willing to give it to me and you're also not willing to let me get it from anyone else, that now our relationship is just over and that's the only option. And that's a huge bummer because, Brendan and I were together for 7 years. That's just marriage. We were dating for almost 2 years before that. So it just feels in some ways that you're throwing everything away when maybe there's still something there if you guys were able to just figure out a way to work it out. And yeah, it's a fairly new thing for people to have this balanced perspective that feels how they do, for example, there are so many people that'll say, well, if a man cheats on his woman, then, men be like that, though. Men can be dogs, and women just need to sort of accept that if he comes home to her, that she's still the main one in his life, and that should be good enough that he still loves you, and whatever, and work past it. But if a woman cheats, it's a whole other scenario. And I feel it's really important that the way that Ken Liu wrote this is that Kuni fucked around on Jia first, but that Jia's fucking around with somebody that actually seems to mean something to her, and it's feels like there's a lot more agency to it, whereas I don't want to say Kuni doesn't have agency. That's not what I'm saying at all. But more that when Kuni got swept up into this victory, he was also there was a literal god there, trying to sort of lure him. And he was riding high on this, this kind of victory and luxury that he had never seen in his life. And that's something that I feel you can't underestimate the effect of that. So in some ways, I give him more of a pass than he probably deserves because I try to think of how I would cope with that, and I don't feel like I do a great job. And tied with that, the deliberateness with which Jia decided that she was going to go sleep with Otho, and the fact that it was something that would give her something to hold on to when she felt like she was drowning. It's like Kuni was doing what he was doing because he felt like he deserved a reward, because he was in the moment like lustful, and that was pretty much it. Jia, it was so much more thought through. And there was like a desperation to it, you know? And the situation that she was in when she chose this is a situation that she will have to live in for God knows how long. Whereas Kuni, you know, this was a temporary situation for him. And now he's living somewhere else entirely. And by the end of this, spoilers, he has a second wife. But it's just, they're in such different situations, and I view the way that things went down with each of them so differently. And I think it's really interesting how this book has chosen to approach their relationship and the way that they're dealing with one another. Kyle is here in the chat, and he says, it's always weird to think about how such a big chunk of the world has been doing things that way for a while. You mean in terms of being polyamorous? Yeah, it's like, you know, it's something that a lot of my friends are into, like not close friends, but a lot of like acquaintances of mine have multiple boyfriends or girlfriends, places that like they live most of the time, but they'll stay at somebody else's place a good amount of the time also. And it really just seems to work super well for them. There's not conflict. There's not, you know, if there's jealousy, I don't ever really see it. It's not like there's a bunch of drama surrounding it, in other words. And I think that the real difference there between people who do have a lot of drama is really communication and outlining truthfully what you want and expect from the other person and what you're okay with and what you're not. But anyway, so I'm getting off on this whole other thing, but I want to talk about, so chapter 37 of Visit Home. A rumor spread in Day that King Kuni was sick and bedridden. When Kindo Marana's envoys came to Dasu to inquire after Kuni's health, a harried Kogoyelu received them. Our poor king thinks of the hegemon every day, said Kogo. He has spoken to me often of how he wishes they had parted on better terms, and he thinks of this illness as an opportunity from the gods for him to reflect on his own circuitous path. Marana sent his report to Matazindu in Karusa. Kuni is in seclusion. No sign of ambition. The lowly weed has decided to settle. Which is just really, like, precious, because y'all just underestimate him so much. It's so funny that, like, the fact that this fucking trickster dude, whom y'all know is sly as fuck, has suddenly, like, disappeared and you don't see it. That's not raising any suspicions with you, but they all just, like, it doesn't even occur to them. Because they're dense. So then, we have the steward, Otho Kryn. He sees this beggar, and he's like, been ordered that if there's any beggars, that they are meant to be fed, and to be given something that will, like, help with their immune system and everything. Which, I just have to say, can I just say, like, how much I love that Gia is thinking like this? That it's not just like, oh, feed them. It's like, feed them something that will keep them full all day and also give them medicine, which I just love so much. And I just, she's so great. And then he reveals himself, and it turns out that this beggar is actually Kuni. And Gia, I guess, does not know yet that he's there. He gets ushered into, like, his bedroom and the bath first thing. And so he's alone in the bedroom, and there's like this really sweet moment hanging on a stand nearby where a few new robes she had sewn for him with her own hands he saw. He buried his nose in them and smelled the fresh herbs that she always used to do their laundry. Tears unbidden came into his eyes. He sat down on their bed and caressed Gia's pillow, thinking of the nights she had spent alone, not knowing what had happened to him. He would have to make it up to her somehow, he vowed. There were a few strands of hair on the pillow. He picked them up affectionately and froze. They were not Gia's red curls, but the straight black hair of a man. Whoops! Yeah. Yeah, this isn't like, oh, maybe it's some of my hair left on the pillow. It's been like years, you know? Not really, but like, you know, at least months. She's done laundry. Your hair is not still there. And it's a really weird thing because he finds this out by himself, and then he meets up with her and the babies, and there is not any confrontation here about it. And I thought that was going to be the first thing that he said to her, but he tries to sort of let it slide and be like weirdly understanding about it. He says, although you were a scrawny young lad when I last saw you, I appreciate your taking care of my family. I know that you've always been faithful and true in your own way. Otho flinched, and Jia's face was frozen halfway between joy and terror. There was a moment of awkwardness before Soto gave Otho a gentle nudge. Kuni seemed to notice nothing. It is my pleasure to serve, Otho replied, and bowed. Discreetly, he and Soto left the room, closing the doors after themselves. So Jia then begins to cry. Like, it's just the whole thing is really awkward. Not only just, you know, him figuring this out and like low-key confronting Otho, but like not really. But also the fact that like his own kids don't know who he is. So he wants to go and hug them and they don't want anything to do with him. Like, it's just really sad and upsetting. And let's see, here it is. Oh yeah. So she says, I was so angry when I heard what you did and how Mata responded. And she's talking about like, you know, how Mata's going to like leave this where it is. He's not going to let you off that island. We're going to be stuck like this. My family doesn't want to talk to me. Nobody in town wants to talk to me. And she says, Kuni, what about begging Mata for forgiveness? Give up your title. Let him make you into one of his ministers, or even a commoner. We can live a happy life back at Nzudi with our children. My family and yours would be so happy to have us back. Maybe you're thinking of flying too high. Kuni looked away. I've thought about it. Jia waited, and then when nothing seemed forthcoming, she nudged. And I think about other families. Other families? On my way here, I had to travel away from the major cities and big roads, and I got to see a little of how bad things have become. Mata may be a great warrior, but he's not a good ruler. The old Tiro states were forced to work together only because they feared the empire more than one another, but now that all the old enmities are resurfacing, Mata's made things worse with his childish map drawing, and the new Tiro kings he created have no legitimacy. All the states are preparing for war, taxes have increased to boost the size of armies, and the prices in the markets keep going up. Though the rebellion's over, the lives of the common people have not grown better. What does any of this have to do with you and me and our children? This is not why I risked you and risked our lives. The people deserve better. Despair and anger warred within Jia as she listened to this speech. You'd rather be loved by the fickle crowd than be a good husband to me and a good father for our children. How can you neglect us while you blather on about saving the people? The world is not your concern. We are. Have you thought that maybe the suffering you see is bound up in the very warp and weft of the world? No matter who is emperor or hegemon, war and death are inevitable. What makes you think you'd be better at ruling the world than him? I don't know, Jia. That's why I've come to you to hear your counsel. But what happened to you? You were once so willing to challenge the world, to imagine how things could be different. Life happened, Kuni. I'm just an ordinary person, a mother. Why is it wrong for me to want my children to be safe, to care about them more than other people's children? Why is it wrong for me to want to live with the man who promised to share my life by my side, to not have him risk death and limb every day? The man by your side? Kuni blurted out. You dare to speak of the man by your side? Jia took a deep breath. Then she looked Kuni in the eyes. You were not here, Kuni. I did what I did to survive, to know that I could still master my fate. But I have never stopped loving you. I never thought faith would be such a difficult thing between us. Then Kuni stood there, stunned. He had not meant to voice his suspicions. He had come home to seek refuge and encouragement, but this wasn't going at all the way he'd imagined. There was now an invisible wall between them, they both saw. They had felt closer to each other in their dreams and yearnings than they did now in person. When they had been apart, each had striven to fulfill an idealized vision they thought the other had of them. But the truth was that they had both changed. Jia's time of isolation and deprivation had made her treasure the stability and charm of an ordinary life. But Kuni's ambition, now stoked, had made him impatient with concerns he deemed petty. The passion that united them early on now seemed to have been reduced to embers. Both focused on the children, anchors for two kites that rode different winds. The visit was drained of its pleasure as Kuni and Jia behaved like guests sharing a house. Brutal. That line in particular, behaved like guests sharing a house. There is really not a lot that can get across to someone who has not gone through it what it is like to go from loving someone desperately to feeling like you don't want them around, to feeling like you'd rather be alone than have them nearby, when they used to be a source of incredible comfort to you, when having them home was what you looked forward to all day. And suddenly you turn this corner and seeing them just gives you grief and anxiety and a sense of self-loathing at times because you know you're not being as good as you could be. And I feel like this really gets that across, that feeling of like we're sharing a home, but we're not unified. We're not together the way that we were. And I'm so glad that they're able to like pull back from this because not a lot of people can. It's a really difficult thing to move past because resentments begin here. And if you don't face up to them honestly, and if you don't have self-awareness about it, it's very easy to fall into, I didn't do anything wrong and you did. Or everything is my fault and I don't know how to fix it. Or there's no fixing this. It's too late. The damage is done and that's it. There are all kinds of directions that it can go in if you're not able to do certain hard labors, emotional labors. And I really felt this like in my soul, especially because Jia and Kuni are written in such a way that you're just rooting for them immediately, you know, and them getting together as quickly as they do in the beginning of the book just feels like, you know, they're meant to be together, obviously, you know. And so seeing two people that you felt so strongly about, for whom things were going so well, run into this kind of brick wall, it's just really hard to like to rationalize, or not rationalize, to reconcile what you're seeing now with who they were, and to know that those were both legitimate. It wasn't false, the love that they had for each other before. It wasn't foolish. It wasn't naive. It was different, and they are different, and people change. And can you change together? Can you do that? Or are you so attached to who you thought this person was that you can't let them go and be who they are? Like, it's just, I don't know, it's a very interesting series of events. So he goes and talks to Soto, the servant, who Kyle says that I've met before, but I cannot remember who this is. And Soto is basically like, you know, listen, we need to, like, as people, we need to acknowledge that we aren't perfect. Our partners aren't perfect. People change, and having faith is actually stronger when you acknowledge doubt and trouble. You know, it's just, you can't pretend that you're going to live forever in love without any sort of doubt. Because if you think that, not only is that naive, but then the moment doubt creeps in, you feel like, oh, well, everything must be breaking down because I have doubts and that's not supposed to happen. And instead, acknowledge that doubts will happen. Even if you don't see it, even from where you are now, you're like, that won't. Just accept eventually it will, and that you have to roll with that and cope with it, rather than looking at the doubts themselves as some sort of failure in your relationship. And And he says, perhaps I've been a fool. And she says, not at all. You haven't raged or been petulant. You know that you've never been absent from her heart. And it's a rare man who would be as severe with himself as he is with his wife. I'm glad to see I was not wrong about you. The sages and Anno classics tell us that faith means one thing for a husband and another for a wife, but you are clearly not a man who accepts received wisdom. So yeah, this whole thing is just, I love this. Great men and women are not constrained in the forms their loves may take, said Soto. You and Jia may love others, but in each other's estimation, you'll always be the first among equals. But it will never be smooth sailing and all sunshine, will it? And she says, what would be the fun in that? So I really liked that conversation, just being, basically roll with the punches, understand that she loves you more than anybody, but that she needs other things, and so do you, and that's okay. And then Soto goes and talks to Jia. And this thing is, I love the way this goes, because Kuni is right away a little bit more open with Soto, because he hasn't been living with her. And you know how that is? I feel like there's something about not knowing someone well that makes it easier to open up. But if you do know someone well, or you feel like you've given them an impression of you, having to break that impression by telling them the truth when you feel like they think they already know the truth is a weird place to be. So Gia's a little bit more reticent about the whole thing. I'm angry that he takes being a king more seriously than being a husband, said Jia. Do you think you have been taking being a wife more seriously than anything else? I have heard your bedroom door open and close at night. Jia stopped her needle. She looked over at Soto. Be careful of your words. Her hands trembled, but Soto continued her needlework, precise, meticulous, each stitch straight and tight, as though measured by the flight of an arrow. Her hands were steady. You misunderstand me, Lady Jia. Do you love your husband? Of course. How do you reconcile your lover to this love, then? It's completely different. Jia kept her voice low, but her face was flushed. Otho was something I needed. For myself, to stay sane, to stay alive. I did it to feel in control again, to be able to be the Lady Jia that those around me needed me to be. I don't regret it, even if the Anno sages may frown on what I've done, and I don't consider it an act of betrayal because Kuni was never displaced from the center of my heart. Do you think Kuni understands? I don't know, but if he's the man I think he is, he should. I never claimed to be perfect, but I've always tried to do the right thing. That is my point, Jia. The heart is a complicated thing, and we are capable of many loves, though we're told we must value one to the exclusion of others. And then she basically goes on to say, you are trying to act like you're not political, simply because in the world we live in, traditional political paths are closed to you because you are a woman. And you are behaving as if meddling, quote unquote, as his wife is beneath you or something to be ashamed of because of the way society talks about meddling women. But the truth is, how society talks about women who meddle has no bearing, or should have no bearing, on what you choose to do, because frankly, people are going to talk shit about women all the time anyway, and since you're given no other option in terms of your involvement, then what are you supposed to do? And you know that you are interested in this, and I understand that you have this desire for stability now, and that losing Kuni again to his work abroad is painful for you. But you also have an opportunity here to exercise a part of your mind and a part of your personality that you have been pretending isn't there, simply because you can't pursue it in a straightforward, conventional way. And essentially, she just calls her out on trying to act like, well, society tells me I can't do this, so I guess I can't. And just sort of giving up. And she says, No matter how diligent you study, can you ever become an official? No matter how brave you feel, can you ever charge onto a battlefield? The conventional life of a good wife is closed to you. You're the one who defied your family's wishes and married a ne'er-do-well because of a dream, who followed a bandit into the mountains and who believed in him when no one else would. I just want things to be safe for me and my family. But it's too late for that, Jia. Some believe that the world is a fate-shaken sieve, where men and women are sorted out by their innate qualities. Others believe that we carve out our own destinies by luck and skill. Yet either way, those in high places have a duty to do more because they're more powerful. If you value safety so much, you should never have said yes the day Kuni asked you to yoke your fate to his. A marriage is a carriage with 2 sets of reins, and you must not let him do all the driving. Accept that you're a political wife, and perhaps you will not feel so helpless. So yeah, I liked that. It's really what it comes down to is acknowledging the reality of her situation and choosing to take control of what she can. It's essentially the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Which is one of my favorite prayers ever. It's just so fucking, encapsulates so much. And that's kind of what this is, you know? So, she and Kuni have a talk, and they are actually able to, really move past this. And I love the way that they talk about this. They both felt their hearts expand large enough to contain a multitude of loves. I really liked that. I just thought that was a beautiful way to say that. So she tells him, you need to go back to the island. And you need to do what you can to make Mata believe that you're not going to make any more moves so that he feels safe. And also, you need to take on another wife. And he's like, what? Hold on, wait. I don't know about this. I don't know about this. I don't know about this. And she's like, all right, listen. You need to convince Mata that you are satisfied where you are. He will never believe. He's seen the 2 of us together. He knows how much that we love each other. And he's never going to believe that you're satisfied being so far away from me and so far away from the children unless you begin a new life, an entirely new and complete life away from me. And if I am away from you and he appears to believe that you are very happy where you are, he might start to leave me the fuck alone. Right now, he can hold me over your head as blackmail any moment he wants. But if he starts to think that maybe I don't mean what I used to you, I'm not going to be as valuable to him anymore. And she says, and I don't mean for you to be mercenary about it. I don't mean for you to marry some woman that you don't care about and pretend to be a good husband to her, to fool Mata. You need to marry somebody that you truly care about because that's very important to you. And you are someone who needs an advisor. So you need somebody intelligent that you can trust, that you can be vulnerable with and share when you are feeling doubts. So whoever you marry, it's got to be real. And I will accept that whoever you marry will be different and separate from me. That it's not going to be a rival situation. And he says something about how, well, nobody's ever going to take your place. And she says they may have to. Because Mata might decide it's not useful for me to be alive anymore. And Kuni is like, wait, what do you mean? He would never do that. And she says, listen, you don't get to control everything. He may kill me and your kids to punish you or push you to do something you don't want to do. And if he does that, you'll have no heirs. And you need those. And getting a wife is not just to get him to leave me alone, but also to secure your own line. So get married and get her pregnant and get this show on the road. So yeah, he says, you speak of a wager of your life as though we're discussing the weather. I'm not so naive as to think it will be easy, said Jia, but our faith is not the kind bound by conventions. No matter who pleases your senses and takes up residence in your heart, I know you'll never be happier than when you can share your flight with me. Kuni kissed her, and I know, no matter who you take to your bed when I can't be around, you'll always be happiest when you soar with me as high as we did in your dream. And she says, my husband is a man of truly capacious mind. I like it. So, okay, chapter 38, and I really need to get a move on because there's 2 more chapters and I just barely talked about the first one. Kyle says she comes up with this idea, but I don't think she thought he would find someone literally the minute he leaves town. True enough. It seems like the gods put this woman in his way because they had finally come to this agreement and they were like, okay, now we can introduce the 2 of you. Soto is going into town, and Kuni wants to go with her. He's feeling pretty pumped after everything that they've decided to do and how he's going to handle things. And she's like, I don't know if this is such a good idea. And he's like, I don't care. I'm going. So he goes and he pulls the same shit that he did so long ago, where there is a guard beating the hell out of this kid. And this kid was one of the Zana prisoners that has been enslaved. Basically, Matsu's holding up the exact same status quo, but against the others. And Kuni thinks to himself, or he says out loud, there's never going to be an end to suffering if he deserves it, is all the justification people need for inflicting pain. Soto appraised Kuni and nodded thoughtfully. So he goes up and he does his thing where he's like, basically he pretends that he wants to torture this kid and that he will buy him from the guard for a fee so that he can take him back to his fucking lair and have his fun. I have some new games I want to try. His voice was oily and smooth, and his eyes radiated pleasure at the anticipation of inflicting torture. Even the 50 chief shuddered, but he nodded when Kuni whispered his offer in his ear. So Kuni gives him 10 silver pieces and says, I have a seal, and I will give this to you if you'll present it to the house of Lord Paring and tell him that I'm Master Kunikin, and that I owe you. They'll pay you out of an advance on my salary. Basically, here's a check. The same shit that he did when we, first met him. At least, when we first met him after he was a child. Let's bring the boy home and clean him up, Kuni whispered to Soto. You and Jia are a lot alike, Soto whispered. You can't help but want to help people. Do not underestimate the potential of that quality. Kuni was thoughtful for a moment. Thank you. The crew officer froze as he got to the impression of the illegible seal. It's you, he shouted. Fin Crookedori! Kuni, Soto, and the boy were not even 20 steps away. What is he talking about? Soto asked, and Kuni smiled bitterly. My past catching up with me. So it turns out to be the exact person that he tried this on before. And he's about to run. And Soto stops him and says, listen, I trust you enough that I'm going to tell you my secret right now, and whispers something in his ear. And we don't get to hear what it is. I think I'm supposed to know or have an inkling, but I don't remember at all. And then she says, do what you have to out there in Dasu. When the time comes, I will be here. He turned around and disappeared into the confused crowd. And then we go to the gods. Why, sister, have you helped that slippery eel slip away? Can't you see he plots against the favored son of Kakru? He's your favorite. I rather like Jia. She's got character. There isn't the time for her to mourn. I think you've been taken in by the pretend virtues of her trickster husband. He's an actor, a fraud. And that's the end of that little interaction. So Soto is a god, right? Or is she because I thought that Kyle's saying no. The way that this chapter or this paragraph is inserted makes it feel like this is Soto talking to somebody else. So I'm trying to figure out, why, sister, have you helped that slippery eel slip away? I guess the help that he's talking about is the young woman who trips, who's carrying little ice blocks, and the soldier like slipping on them. I guess that's the god interfering that they're talking about. But anyway, Kuni bails, and he gets this horse, and he's like trying to ride away, and this horse is busted up and broken down and old and just not able to keep up the pace it's going to need to outrun soldiers. And finally, he sees this cottage, and he jumps off his horse and goes in, and there's this woman there, and he's like, I really need your help. Can you please help me? And he isn't able to really explain anything, but she says, if you're running from the hegemon, you're probably not that bad. And Kuni thinks to himself about like the significance of that little moment. The fact that that's her response is just like, well, the hegemon is a shit. So if you're his enemy, then you're my friend. And that Mata always discounted the importance of having the support of the people behind him and how much that's going to catch up with him in the end. And he just does not seem to take that into consideration. The people were like the sea. They could float a heavily laden ship, or they could make it sink. So she hides him in her well and gets him to like stand in the bottom of it and put the bucket upside down over his head so that it just kind of looks like the bucket's floating there, but he will be completely hidden, which is really smart. And then she goes into her house and she pours some water on the fire, because there's a fire already burning. And this causes all of this smoke to fill the house. And the riders catch up, and they're asking her if she's seen Kuni, and she's saying no. And they're like, well, we have to search this place anyway. And even though it's filled with smoke. So he goes in there, and this description, I was just like, is this fucking magic? And it turns out, yes, it is. Walked deeper into the small cottage. Shadows seemed to leap out of the thick smoke, indistinct shapes, and monsters with eyes of fire. The 50 chief became frightened and confused. His head felt very thick and slow for some reason. It was as though the smoke filled his head. The man you are seeking is not here, the woman's voice said. Not here, the 50 chief repeated. He shook his head. He just couldn't think with all of this smoke. He backed out of the dark interior of the cottage, and his head instantly cleared. Of course the man I'm seeking isn't here. How silly of me. Why would Kuniguru try to hide in a peasant's cottage? Every man in Kakru knows that Kuniguru betrayed the great hegemon Zindu, and no one would dare help him. So he thinks this, and then he's like, all right, you know what? We're going to take off, and I don't think I'm even going to tell anybody that we found Kuni, because if they know we let him slip through our fingers, it's going to be like much worse for us in the end. So we'll just keep this shit to ourselves. So he takes off, and she helps Kuni up out of the well. And she tells him that she is a smoke crafter. And it turns out, of course, that she's very pretty. And they sit down and have a meal together, and she demonstrates the way that she's able to craft this smoke into different shapes. And it's such a weird story. She talks about how her mother was able to create mazes for people out of smoke, and that they would pay to walk through them and be frightened or challenged by monsters or whatever. It's basically like she was making, like, you know, the equivalent of a Halloween walkthrough, which is super fun. Like, people love that kind of shit. And that there would be like even like the kind of thing that you would see at a hypnotism show, where she could get them to do all kinds of like weird things. And one day a prince comes, and he has this reputation for being very fierce, and she thinks that she's going to give him a good time by showing him some monsters that he can fight with his sword, and it'll basically be like him being able to show off. But it turns out that this prince is a coward, and when he sees these monsters, he flips out and shits his pants and runs screaming from the labyrinth. And the king blames her for humiliating his son and wants to execute her for witchcraft. But she uses these herbs to escape. She gets arrested, but like convinces the guards to get her some herbs because she has her period and she needs some medicine. And she uses it to create this smoke and escape and come to Kakru, and they hide out there. And we have this like little inside of her head moment of her thinking about how her power is different from her mother's. That her mother had been skilled in planting suggestions in an audience while smoke dulled their senses, but Rosanna was best at the opposite, clearing the minds of those in thrall to the smoke. She was the one who would lead them out of the labyrinths after they'd had their fun, the one who would show them that the monsters they thought they saw were not real. If she wished, she could also manipulate the smoke in people's hearts and behind their eyes, making them see visions where there was nothing, to have doubts when there was clarity. But she far preferred to do the opposite. So I really like that. I think that's a really cool power that's very strange and subtle and kind of nebulous. No pun intended. But I like it, and I'm interested to see where this goes. And I like how Kuni is thinking about how different it is to be with her, that he can be really, truly relaxed in a way that he couldn't even be with Jia, because Jia grew up in a political household and understands how everything that she did was being interpreted by somebody who was watching her. And so she had the same self-awareness that he does, and that they would sort of try and like play it against one another. And this is something I really like, because it's not like what he's talking about is inherently a negative thing. It's just that it's a particular thing that he didn't know he needed some relief from. So Jia was great when he was like cultivating these skills, but now that he has these skills and they're part of his job, it's a lot more tiring. And so being around somebody that he doesn't have to do this with is like a really welcome relief. And I found that very interesting. Like, I just really appreciate how well this book can balance having Jia be his first and true love, while also acknowledging that people bring different things into your life. And, you know, it's just a very different situation. Like, you know, Brendan and I were amazing performers together. And people would, I'm not even talking about like the podcast, which we started together, but also just being around other people. We would be the entertainment. Like, you can ask anyone who was around us when we were together. Rashawn has said this a number of times, that he and I played so naturally and beautifully off each other that it was like watching a show. And we would be the kind of like couple that when we were at checkout, the cashier was cracking up because of the way he and I were like going back and forth about something really mundane, but we were very funny and we were able to do that with each other. And is that something that I really miss in a lot of ways? Yes, absolutely. But what I have with Owen is so different and so much more satisfying to me now, because performing is something that I was learning and acknowledging as something that I wanted before. And now I have a grasp on that and I understand that about myself, and I'm kind of moved past it. And now I just want somebody who gets me, and Owen does, you know? So there's just like a lot of different things that you need at different parts of your life. And just because somebody offers you something that you don't necessarily need anymore doesn't mean that you don't love them anymore. It just means that it's time for the next thing, and you can shift them over and still have them be there, but they aren't necessarily all there is. So, all right. So I really liked this, and it turns out that he just decides that he's going to marry her. And it's just like a very quick decision, but we all know that this is like obviously the right thing to do. So let's go to chapter 39, Letters, the 9th month in the first year of the Principate. So he's writing secretly the way that he had before, using the invisible dandelion ink. And he's asking Jia, like, do you need money? and telling her what's going on with him, that he got the gifts that she sent for him and Rosanna. And I like that, like, she apparently smuggled a bunch of stuff to him too, under the guise of it being like wedding gifts, which that was really fun. And he talks about how, like, the wedding was really lavish, but because it was like a matter of state, that it turned into this, like, kind of circus that wasn't really as much fun as their wedding had been. And he says that he kind of thinks that he's convincing Kimno Marana that he isn't a threat anymore. And that it's just, you know, do you not miss home, Lord Garou? He probed after he waved his eating sticks to refuse my offer of more spicy dumplings. Home is where the heart is, I said, looking over at Rosanna. I hope my performance was convincing. So she writes back and is like, don't worry, Mata's taking care of everything in terms of money. We don't really need anything. I'm very curious about Rosanna, and I want to meet her. I'm very interested in that. Mata came to see me, just himself this time and unarmed. Kuni seems to prefer his new home, he said. Loyalty comes harder to some than others. I suppose some men think of women like clothes, I said, dabbing at my eyes. Newer is better. He looked at me, and for a moment it seemed as if he was the Mata I knew, the man who held my son in his palm and joked with you. And then his face hardened and he left. Yeah, I kind of feel like that's probably like exactly, you know, he has this moment of feeling sympathy for her and caring about this. And then he's like, yeah, and Mata also betrayed me. So fuck that guy, you know, and then leaves. So, I'm trying to get to this, like, next part that's, like, important. Okay, here it is. He's talking about just the fact that his ideals are getting more solid than they used to be, that he's understanding what he's trying to fight for. And he says, I've come to think that Emperor Mapidere was misunderstood. And then he says, let me finish. And he talks about how I have seen all of the, like, violence and destruction that came out of his rule. But I found a bunch of documents, and he did do a lot of good in a way. That he wanted, like, the exchange of ideas to be free, that he didn't want these little states that kept to themselves. He wanted everybody to be unified. And he wanted to make sure that whatever one state had that might benefit another could be shared, and that commerce could flow more easily as well and lift everybody up. So he enforced it in a terrible way and was very short-sighted about how much people were going to, like, subscribe to his ideals or keep this up after he was gone. But what his goal in some ways was kind of honorable. And he says, you know, basically he's talking about the different states and the shifting borders of them and how much trouble that causes. And he says, contrary to what you might have heard, Dasu is a nice place. There are so few nobles here, except the ones I've made myself, that there are no boring parties or ridiculous gossip. I'm working on getting everyone to stop calling me Your Majesty. I don't like the way people stumble over it, and I don't much feel like a king. Kogo hates how I'm so careless with protocol, and you know how stubborn he can be. So he talks about how they're really, like, big on fish there, that all of their food is fish and shrimp and crab and lobsters, and that what they're doing is creating basically a marketing campaign where they're going to make a sort of certification for cooks that they can fly this flag that has a whale on it to advertise that they are a certified Dasu, authentic Dasu cook. And it will be something that brings people over and gets, like, Dasu traditions spread around and encourages people to think of Dasu in a positive way. Like, ooh, I love their food. And when they see the banner, they remember, they associate that with something pleasurable. And I love that he's basically fucking doing, like, a Starbucks campaign here. Like, this is just, it really is. Because I don't know if you guys have this with any particular brand. I am, and I will freely admit this, I am so into aesthetic and comfort that it makes me particularly susceptible to marketing. If you have a good marketing campaign, even if all of my common sense tells me that your product is probably not great, I will probably give it at least a shot. And Starbucks is one of those brands that I see their sign and immediately I'm like, ooh, nice. Like it's a comforting, excited, pleasurable association. Even if I don't feel like having coffee, when I see the sign, I'm like, maybe I should get one. And I don't do it usually, but it does cross my mind. I'll, think that I will even sort of convince myself that I like a lot of their drinks more than I do, simply because I think I do until I taste them. And then I'm like, oh yeah, right. I didn't even really like this one. It's a weird, effective thing that really works on my brain. So that's basically what he's trying to do, but with this banner. And I really love that Kogo is the one that's behind a lot of this. And he also is figuring out about new crops that are a lot better than the ones that they had been using on this island that just take to the soil better. And that he is figuring out a new tax code. And Kogo is so clever because the taxes, of course, are something near and dear to Kindo Marana's heart. And so he goes to Kindo Marana humbly asking for advice on how to alter their tax codes. And this gets Kindo, it gets on his good side and also gives the impression that they are very dedicated to their island and doing this properly if they're paying attention to details like this. So it gives Marana somebody to be friends with who is concerned about the same things that he is. And it also makes it so that they are, they seem like less of a threat. They're not trying to rise up. They're simply trying to cultivate what they have. And I really love how tactical this is. And I love I love Kogo and the way that his mind works. And my main thing about Kuni is how he recognizes talent. And he's not threatened by it, and he's not concerned that if you have talent in this, that you must be working against him. He wants to see the good in everybody. He's not stupid. He can tell when there's something else going on. But if somebody's good at something, then he's like, yes, do that. Thank you. And we'll let them take the credit. Even if they try and give the credit to him to make him look good, he'll low-key be nudging people who are complimenting him and be like, yeah, but this is really all his idea, though, so seriously. And I just really, really like that. This whole thing is just sort of warms my heart in the way that good cooperation always does. It's how I felt when Kuni and Mata were first working together. And I was so excited about how they seemed to complement each other really well. But Kogo isn't fucking bananas. So, yeah. He says, finishes up this letter that he writes about, the Tiro state squabbling, and that there aren't a lot of soldiers that are willing to, defect, because he's got Rin, I'm mad at. I can't get over what Rin did, honestly. He just fucked so much up that it's hard for me to really, move on. But Rin is trying to, circulate the, on the down low, that, they're looking for men to join them, and Kuni is a little disappointed at how low the turnout has been, and that those who come often leave because they have to be so slow and meticulous about how they decide to do this, that a lot of them are impatient and just don't really see that this is going to play out and be worth it, so they leave again. So then he gets another letter from Jia, and who's like, all right, listen, I'm going to tell you what I think, and I'm not going to worry about people calling me meddling. First of all, I want to tell you that I'm not going to these stupid fucking parties anymore. Everybody, bags on me, bags on you, and I'm supposed to just sit there and take it, so I just decided to leave. And this moment, too, she says, the last party I went to, Mata actually sent the invitation himself. I guess he wanted to feel out your ambition by observing the way I conducted myself. Yeah, so she's I guess Mata is watching her to see if she's cozying up to other people and tell, if basically, is your wife working on your behalf to get people on your side? And it's obvious that she's not getting along with anybody. and she doesn't want to be here, so she's just going to stop going, which is probably going to endear her to Mata more than anything, just shutting herself off from everyone. But she talks about Soto and how great she is, and she disappears whenever any member of the nobility stops by, pretending to inquire after me and the children, but in reality just here to gather material for gossip. Even when Mata stopped by personally the other day, she hid in the kitchen and wouldn't come out. So yeah, like, she's obviously somebody that nobles are going to recognize, but I just cannot remember who she is. And she says, I'm going to tell you about some things that I think you're neglecting. You talk about how it's really difficult to find and retain capable men to serve you. But what about the women? You're in a position of weakness, and other people who are also in a position of weakness, who want to do whatever they can, are going to be drawn to you, someone who is willing to do whatever they can. Mata is a man who believes in traditions. Those who cannot compete for his attention, the desperate, the poor, those without lineages or formal learning, may be far more willing to gamble with you. It's not our custom or practice to look to women for talent, so who is to say that you may not have more success there? Don't be shocked by my suggestion. I'm not saying you should turn the world upside down and do everything the Ano sages warned against in their ancient books, but think about what I have said, and perhaps you may find an opportunity you've overlooked. Also, do you remember Puma Yemu, commander of the Whirlwind Riders? He did so much to aid you, and then Mata basically slapped him back down, and now he's a bandit again. I let him know that you were looking for somebody to help, and he's interested. And I was like, oh shit, because I remember Puma Yemu, and he was like, badass, but also intelligent enough to know when he was beaten, and also rightfully respected Kuni a lot. So I'm excited about this turn of events. So yeah, Kuni writes back to her and is just like, yeah, okay, hi, thank you. That's excellent advice. This is turning out really well. And Puma Yemu could be very valuable. I'm totally excited about all of this. You're great. Extra points for you. But then he says, I'm so sad because Kogo just bailed and I don't know where he went and he's betrayed me and I don't know what to think. I'm not even mad. I'm just so upset. But then the very next letter, don't worry about it. He's back. And I was like, the whole time I was reading that, I was like, there's good reason for this. Kogo did not bail. He's definitely going to be back. He was doing something. Trust this guy. And sure enough, Kogo coming through. So it turns out that he was chasing Jin Mazotti, a corporal. And Kuni says at least 20 corporals have deserted in the last months, and who knows how many hundred chiefs and captains, and you went away for a whole week to chase him down? What's so special about him? Jin doesn't believe he'll be given enough respect here in Dasu. He moved to follow Mata Zindu, but Mata never listened to any of his suggestions or gave him much to do. So when we departed for Dasu, Jin defected and joined us. But now that he's been here a few months and hasn't been promoted, he decided to leave, even though I told him to be patient and wait for me to present him to you. So I had no time to tell you anything. I had to chase after him by moonlight. I was in my slippers, not even having had the chance to put on good walking shoes. So Kogo is talking about how he was chasing Jin down, and Jin was ahead of him by a bit. And he winds up getting held back by a doctor who was asking Jin to hold some doves while he wrote out a long prescription to attach to the dove's leg and send out. And it is pretty obvious that this doctor is a god who specifically stepped into Jin's way to keep Jin from being able to leave so that Kogo could catch up to him. And it seems as if Jin recognizes this god at one point and says, who are you? And the god says, I think you already know. What do you want with me? I've always regretted what was done to you in my name, the doctor said. So I've kept an eye on you, though I've tried to stay out of your way because you can take care of yourself, and a doctor's first rule is to do no harm. I'm afraid that if you leave Dasu, you'll never return, and that would be a harm. If that is all true, said Jin, then you must know the truth about me. What chances can a person like me have with a lord of great repute like Kuni Garu? Lord Garu is hungry for talent. He's seeking everywhere, among bandits, pickpockets, scholars who never pass the imperial examinations, deserters, even women. Is this true? Asked Jin, turning to me, and I nodded. So it turns out the doctor disappeared down the beach, and Jin said that he would come back, and we went to Kogo's house. And he says Jin Mizzotti is a small man, thin and wiry. He has leathery, dark brown skin, black hair cropped close to the skull, and dark brown eyes that dart around, taking everything in. Kogo had told me that I needed to be respectful, so I didn't act like the king, just a man in search of a great warrior. That was easy. I'm always doing that anyway. I bowed down and asked if I had the honor of meeting the famed master Jin Mizzotti. It's Miss Jin Mizzotti, actually. And she bowed back in a woman's jiri, her hands folded across her chest. I came back in part because I heard that you're even willing to consider the talents of the weaker sex. But if you're going to pay me the honor of an audience, I should at least let you know the truth about myself. Well, imagine the expressions on Kogo's and my faces, and how prescient of you, my Jia. Kisses for both Tototika and Ratatika. Your Kuni, ecstatic. It's a pretty great ending. Jin is... I'm very excited about this development. I'm very excited, guys. Like, there's so much in these books that I keep being like, how is this author going to maintain my interest after everything that's happened? And he's doing it. You know, he's still doing it. I just really want to know what's going to happen. So, Kyle says, I'm so excited we finally meet Jin, one of my faves. Yay! Yeah, so there is so much in there, and I just love it all. It's so good. So yeah, thank you again, Kyle, for commissioning. This is so much fun to read. I just want more people to read it. And, I mentioned it to so many different people, and so far as I know, nobody has listened to me yet. So I'll keep you all posted. But I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you, Kyle, for being here and leading me a little bit with your comments here. Thank you, everybody who is listening. I hope that you enjoyed the episode, and I will see you again soon with a new one. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.